happening across the country. Shall be bringing you the very latest in a subsequent news bulletin. But now we come back to the studio. We have a conversation around employment, disability, and also just inclusive employment in our workplaces. To have this discussion with me is Julia Sambura, Advocacy Officer in ABLE, and also Alan Maonga, Head of People, Culture and Diversity, Next Stop Founders. Now, there's a conversation that is timely right now, and I just want to come to you, Alan. When we talk about things to do with inclusive employment, what exactly do you mean with that?
Thank you for having us in the studio. My name is Alan, as correctly said, and when we talk about inclusive employment, it's basically bringing in everybody into the fold. In the HR space, we keep on talking about bringing your whole in the workplaces. So it's just in terms of bringing everybody in the workplace and making sure that they deliver in their mandate, in their unique way. You may be a slow learner, you may be a fast learner, you may be having mobility challenges, but then we accommodate you in the workplace the way you are and allow you to deliver in your own approaches to be able to deliver the same goal that everybody is expected to.
And I'll come to you, Julius. Now, Julius, you are a person with a disability.
Yes.
But that has not meant that you're not able to do things out there. I mean, I've seen you drive cars despite all that is there.
Yes.
And now, when we talk about inclusivity in places of employment, you are directly affected. What is it that you want to see change in places of work?
Thank you, Aseto. And when we talk about inclusive employment, we've come a long way. We have the Constitution of 2010. 14 years later, we are still talking about affirmative action. But when you look at the wholesome experience at the workplace, it's supposed to have reasonable accommodation, regardless of your abilities. So for the employer, you're supposed to think it through, from recruitment to even retirement of a person, whatever situation they are in, whatever abilities they may lack or have. And when you talk about persons with disabilities, normally people are like, oh, you have a disability. But you find that we have intersectionality. A person with a disability is a youth. A person with a disability is a woman. A person with a disability may have other, intervening circumstances. So it doesn't mean that when you have a disability now, we magnify the disability and forget all these other things. And even at the workplace, it's supposed to be conducive for your working and delivery. And that's how you even encourage persons with disabilities to take pride in what they do, but also motivate them to even do better and do more.
And I come to you, Alan, now. The way Julius explains is the fact that as much as we have these, section of the society, people with disabilities, but within them we also have all these segregations in terms of they're a youth, they're a woman, it's a child, And this comes to now in employment places, HR policies with regard to addressing these factors. So how should, places of work approach these issues so that it is not just them ticking the box in terms of it is a requirement, but they do it because it is what is right?
Correct. And thank you for that question. What we always say in our circles is that disability inclusion has nothing to do with policies. With terms of the laws. The laws are there to be able to create a framework and consistency. But it has all things to do with the right thing to be able to do, the best thing to be able to do. And you have to start from a point of knowing what are we dealing with so that it makes business sense. Because at the end of the day, the business owner of company Y or company X is looking at the bottom line. So then it needs to make business sense. And then that brings us back in terms of what is disability. Then we have many definitions about what disability is and who is a person with disability. And in our Act of 2013, the Disability Act of 2013 clearly defines that who is a person with disability. It has to be permanent, but then we also accommodate persons with temporal disability, and the law is very clear in terms of how that moves into being a permanent disability and who that person is. So at the workplace, then you have to have policies, and not one single policy that says disability inclusion policies. You look at the different policies, whether they are 16, 17, 18 of them. So you look at the recruitment and selection policy, you look at your onboarding process, you look at your performance management, you look at your at the entire talent management policy you have, compensation benefit, all that, including retirement policies, all that, you have an inclusive perspective. Let's take the one simple policy, like in terms of the attraction recruitment policy. Then how do you reach a bigger pool of participants, including those without disability? Are your adverts more accessible? Can they be accessed with anybody who cannot be able to see? For example, if you have an advert and you share it through WhatsApp, will Julius able to see that particular advert? Then have you made it accessible? Which platforms are you sharing out those particular adverts for it to be able to become accessible? At the point of having the one-on-one interaction with a candidate who has disability, then what are the reasonable accommodations? And then what are the measures have you put in place to make sure that your candidate who is coming into your workplace can be able to ask for more support if need be? But then Julius will tell you that we keep on advocating for universal workspaces, whereby anybody who walks into the workspaces that may have acquired disability at the point of birth or may acquire disability in the line of work can easily come in and fit.
And let me just come talk to Julius. Now, Julius, well, I'm meant to understand that disability, you are not born with a disability.
Yes.
It came later in life. And, and this is a situation where, in terms of policies, and what does it say in such situations? And that notwithstanding now, as you go about working in your butter and bread, your day-to-day activities, how easy is it for you to walk to a client and say, yo, this is what I can do? Give me an opportunity. How easy is it, and what do you want to see change?
Thank you, Aseto. It's never been easy. One thing you realize with disability, every time you're trying to even like break barriers, something else comes in. And people, we've had like politics, people saying, you know, people born with disabilities have it harder than people who acquire the disability later on. But having a disability has no limits, has no, you know, sort of like favorism. You cannot say that since I became blind at a later age, I have it easier than any other person who was born blind. And when you look at how society views disability, we have stigma, we have discrimination. All these things, we are meant to believe that the society should be inclusive, but in the real sense, you find people segregating and discriminating upon persons with disabilities. Even you'll be surprised that even your loved ones will still discriminate you. So when it comes to employment and working spaces, you find employers who employ persons with disabilities, but it's sort of like a tokenism to just tick a box that I have these people and I've met my cut. Others actually make it look good for them, for the company, and some of them think they will, you know, have tax reliefs and all that. And you find even like people online saying, you know, for persons with disabilities, you have it easier because you have tax exemptions. We have income tax exemption. And when you look at the needs of persons with disabilities, it's not even enough. It's just a relief to make sure that with other intervening, you know, things in your life, you're able to cope with, you know. But when you talk about VAT, if you're buying a bread at 70 shillings, I still buy the same bread at 70 shillings, regardless of having my disability or not. So we are supposed to look at disability as not as them versus us thing, but as a way to have everyone included in everything that we do in our day-to-day life. So when you look at our workspaces, look at accessibility from digital to built environment, look at reasonable accommodation. Are you providing assistive technology to persons with disabilities? Are you creating an environment that is conducive for them to actually thrive instead of bringing them on board and later on trying to fix things or creating bridges? Just make it, as Alan has said, have a universal design so that anyone who's coming in, they don't have to, you know, break up their back trying to fit in or trying to prove themselves.
Okay. Alan, now here's a question where the way he speaks, it is a question of people think they have it easy. it is not a favor that they're being given. I mean, when someone is working at your institution, they are giving you value for work.
Yeah.
Therefore, how do we then cure the problem that exists in terms of stigma? How do we make it easier for people with disability to walk to us, be able to express themselves, and we see the value in them based off what they are offering and not how they live, not in terms of the disability they live with?
Thank you. I just speak from where Julius has left, and then there's a good note that you don't need to create a situation whereby it is us against them, or vice versa. And that is whereby holistically looking at the policies which will create a systematic approach in terms of everything you do. For example, if you're looking at promotions, then what is the criteria of promotions? Then it applies across board. If you are doing hiring of any persons in the organization, including persons with disabilities, then what is the criteria for you to be able to be promoted from role A to role B? Then that should be able to be cut across everybody else. The only tweak that comes in terms of that process, it is what we call the reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodation is creating an environment, an enabling environment for persons with disabilities who would need a bit of support to be able to optimally produce as per what is expected. So it has nothing to do with favorism. It has nothing to do with tokenism. It has all to do with credentials. And for the record, we have skilled persons with disability in this country who can be able to fit in any sector. Talk about manufacturing, talk about the transport sector, talk about the education sector, talk about the health sector. So we have them, so it is very easy. So then how do we attract them? Is what now we should be able to make that focus and build capacity on both fronts. So look at the employers and be able to tell them, looking at what we have as a categories of disabilities in the country, then we are visible and invisible. How do you incorporate all of them into the workplaces? Look at the supply chain whereby we have persons with ability sit. Then what are the skill sets they have? Then we marry the two and be able to have them harmoniously coexist in the workspaces by talking about unconscious bias and retraining and having that conversation at the employment space, at the workspaces, so that then all employees in the organization know that we value disability inclusion. It is part of our DNA. It makes the conversation easy, it makes the integration easy, it makes the workplace very well balanced.
Now, Julius, Enable is in charge of a lot of initiatives out there. I'll just go through some. That is giving VIP youth kids digital skills, so it's easier for them to transition to higher education. I mean, there are issues to do with you have computer trainers who are VIPs, so they're practicing inclusive employment. Now, all these initiatives that you are undertaking, how is it being received, and what change is it doing in terms of just enabling those with the disability to be able to do those which for a very long time it's been thought that they cannot do it?
Enable has brought forth interventions that are shifting mindsets and perceptions on disability. And as you see me, I'm actually like a walking billboard for what's possible. And all thanks to Enable, I had acquired skills, computer skills that enabled me to go to higher education and even beyond. The reason why I'm able to work with my colleagues and have a harmonious, working environment is because I have assistive technology, and digital accessibility has enabled me to be at par with them when we are working, and even outside here in the society, using technology and using it as a leveling ground. The reason why we advocate for inclusive employment, and you can look at the way even like our instructors, we employ persons who are blind and now integrating even other disabilities. We have the Inclusive Africa Conference that's coming up next month that is holistic of all disabilities, and we get to bring discussions on what is happening in the space and what needs to happen for a change to occur. Alan will be actually at the panel for inclusive employment at the conference, and we have thought leaders in Africa. So we look at not only Kenya, but what is happening in other countries and even beyond the continent. What are we supposed to take as best practices when it comes to inclusive employment? And this cuts across even like self-employment, because most persons with disabilities don't have formal employment. So you find that they are small businesses. How do we encourage them and give them a reason to, push boundaries and keep on going, even when we have all these other things that are coming up, so that it doesn't feel like just because of my disability, then I'm disadvantaged. It's supposed to be because of my disability, I'm able to, do this and that. And when it comes to even like delivery, you look at what I'm doing as merit, not as a favor, as you said, Aseto. Yes.
And I come to you, Alan, finally now. Let's talk about the KS 2952 in terms of putting in place conditions and accessibility standards in places of employment. How soon or how close are we to achieving that?
It's quite a good document, and Julia said a lot of input in terms of putting up that particular standard from KEBS, whereby any entity, whether small, big, medium, should be able to have those guidelines. And the guidelines are very simple, because if you ask what are the reasonable accommodations in terms of anybody accessing any digital content, including what we're just airing right now, how accessible is it? Do we have closed captions? Are you able to change the background of it? How accessible is it to any form of disability? We are not close in achieving it, but we are making steps. Why are we not close in achieving it? It is the advocacy in terms of making sure that, hey, this standard is there. Any employer, any employee, any media house can be able to adapt. So it's a matter of us going out to be able to do more outreaches, to be able to make awareness for any employers to be able to reach out, to be able to find out. The guideline is there. It's very easy to be able to look at it. If we just slightly step away from that and be able just to localize the discussion, if you walk in any building and you find there's a lift, a modern lift, it will tell you doors opening, doors closing. Your lift number 4 or floor number 5. Very easy for Julius to be able to know the doors are opening, the doors are closing. If you are on your phone trying to update something, then you'll of course know that the door is opening, the door is closing. So that particular standard is as simple as just updating your software on the lift to be able to give you notification. Is as simple as that. I know we'll be doing more at the conference within Julius and the team, just to be able to amplify that particular standard from a Kenyan context, which can be adapted across the board.
And yes, indeed, a lot of conversations with regard to inclusive employment, and it is something that ought to be done, not just because it is a token, but because it is the right thing to do. In studio with me is Alan Maunga, Head of People, Culture and Diversity, Next Step Foundation, Asante Sana, and Julius Mbuda, Advocacy Officer in Able. Wish you the very best in the good work that you continue to do. This conversation definitely must continue. But now on News Center, let's take a short commercial break. We will be back, but when we come back, we have a conversation on